I'm very grateful to be here this morning. So the organization that I represent is called Circle Up Center for Practical Peace Building. Now, did you all at least receive the flyer? Did you see that in the mail? In the email? So I have someone that is making copies of that so that you'll each have at least that to look at and reference. Probably would be good for me to have one myself. At any rate, Circle Up Center for Practical Peace Building. What that means, practical peace building, for me, is the idea of peace literacy. Peace literacy. Now, what is peace literacy, you might ask? You know, I read an article back in June that talked about how every year we graduate millions of high school students in the United States. And those students will be academically literate. They'll know how to read, they'll know how to do math, they'll know science and history, and they will have learned probably a lot of things that they will never ever use again in their adult careers. Do y'all agree? Now these very same young people will graduate from these high schools, never ever probably taking a class in conflict resolution. They will probably have no idea what to do with their uncomfortable emotions, have never been taught what to do with anger when it escalates. They likely will not have been taught how to forgive someone who's harmed them. Now, I don't know about you all, but to me, those are really essential pieces of life. And that's what peace literacy is about. Peace literacy is the arts and science of being in a relationship, right? It's the art and science of understanding people. Great, so now I hope you will all have a handout. So it is a vital and essential thing, I think, for life. And here's the thing, we haven't always known how to share that message. We haven't always known that it was a science. All of us learn, at least I did, how to be in a relationship from the other people in my life, right? The adults, my parents, my teachers, all of those people. Now, there were some people in that spectrum of my life that really never learned how to deal with their anger very well. Do you know what I'm talking about? They never learned how to deal with their sadness. They never learned how to deal with fear. And those are all things, you'll realize that there's a whole science now behind that. How many of you have heard the term social emotional learning? Excellent. Social emotional learning. That is the science that I'm talking about. But I'm going to back it up just a second here. I started, one of the people who started this organization, another one of those people is right there, Mira Colleen, another friend of mine, Corinne Dean, and several other people in our community who have seen a need. Now this started for me, well, it started many, many years ago, but the point of the seed being planted was when I attended a seminar or workshop, 5-day immersion workshop at the River Phoenix Center for Peace Building in Gainesville. And it was life-changing. You see, the day before I attended that event, a 19-year-old young man took a shotgun into Forest High School and discharged that weapon. And here I was the next day in a workshop that had to deal with peace, right? Dealing with peace building. And it felt very much a part of my destiny and my reason for being there. And so the seed was planted in that moment for creating a peace building center here in Ocala. Now, peace building might sound airy-fairy for some folks, you know, like something that happens between countries and it's between great leaders. But in my world, peace building is being able to navigate the conflicts, say, with my husband, or with my children, or with my parents, or with my neighbors, or my coworkers, or the members of my congregation, or the others in my community. All of those things from their peace building. And so I started on this journey of learning that art and science of peace building. And as I left that workshop at River Phoenix, they asked 3 things of us. Number 1, what is something you can take from what you learned here that you can implement right away? What's something that would be a stretch? And then what's something that would be the pie in the sky? So the thing that was the easy thing for me to do was to take the curriculum, one of the pieces that I learned, social emotional learning, and to teach that 10-week course to a group of inmates at Marion Correctional Institution. Now, these are men who are in prison for various things. They come to the class willingly, but they're there for a wide array of crimes. And so that was the first thing I could do. I could do that right away. The thing that would be a stretch would be to introduce this into my spiritual community. The thing that would be the pie in the sky was, guess what? Start a peace building center here in Ocala. Right? Start to teach people and to teach our children these ideas and these practices that many of us were not taught ourselves as children. So that's how the seed got planted. And so I started teaching this 10-week curriculum on social emotional learning to these 25 inmates at Marion Correctional. And at the end of the 10 weeks, they taught back what they'd learned. And it was incredible. It was incredible. They had a group of, it was inmates and prison administrators and volunteers, and one after another, these men shared how their hearts had been cracked open and how they learned things in that class that could have changed the trajectory of their lives. One after another said, if I just learned this when I was a kid, if I just learned this then, I wouldn't be here. Why aren't we teaching this to all of our kids? So what is this? What is this teaching, this amazing teaching? The science, again, of social emotional learning. Emotional learning, number one, is understanding your own emotions, how to regulate them, how to manage them. Number two is number three, is how to recognize those emotional states in other people and help them deal with them, so that we understand when someone's upset, they haven't had their coffee, that's not the time to talk to them about your big problem, right? And it seems like, duh, if you've been in a relationship with anyone, if you've ever made a friend, you know what these skills are. Now, that doesn't mean that you know how to teach it, right? How many of us know how to read? But does that mean that we can teach a 5-year-old how to read or a 6-year-old? Right? There are skills that go with that. So we may be very social emotionally competent, and I'm going to assume that if you're part of this group, you probably are. But what this does is it breaks it down into the pieces so you understand why it is that you are a good communicator. You understand why you have great relationships, or maybe you come to understand why you don't. And then this is a skill set that can be taught and it can be learned. It can be learned. So one of the foundational pieces of this teaching, the thing that I love paradigm shifts. Anybody else like that? When somebody gives you some information and it totally changes the way you look at things, like you get a whole new vantage point, a new world opens up for you. And there's this great quote that was going to be on my PowerPoint that talks about the paradigm, the belief that conflict itself is a reflection of people's unmet needs. Right? Would you all agree? That conflict, we're all like this iceberg of people. We see this nice little beautiful thing on the surface, what we want people to see about us, but underneath there's all this other stuff going on. Right? All these needs and feelings and circumstances. And so we're all like this, this iceberg. And the social emotional learning is part of understanding what is underneath that iceberg and helping it to come to the surface. So if you have unmet needs and someone else has unmet needs, those needs are bumping up against each other. That's what we call a conflict, right? So every conflict is a result of unmet needs. So if we can identify what those unmet needs might be, that's a way of resolving conflict. That's part of what this work is about. So again, I'm doing this off the top of my head. Am I doing all right? Maybe I should have you ask me questions. It's sometimes easier. So we want to help people to be able to meet their needs. That's part of Conflict Resolution 101. And so the paradigm shift is understanding that we are not safer than by isolating ourselves or other people, right? Or by putting up the walls or having more weapons. In fact, we become less safe because of those things. The paradigm shift is to dive into the heart of a conflict, is to dive into it and find out the messages that it's trying to give you. What is it that people are needing? What are the unmet needs that are here, and how can we resolve those needs? And that's a huge shift. It's a tremendous shift in thinking, especially for someone like me who doesn't like conflict and doesn't like confrontation, right? But we know that what we resist persists. And so as we keep others isolated from ourselves, we end up making ourselves less safe in the long run. So part of this teaching is, how do you then go into the conflict effectively? Right? You don't want to dive into the heart of conflict without having the tools and the principles and the ideas, because you're going to get knocked around a little bit. Right? But now if you understand how this works, then you can navigate that conflict, come out the other side, and maybe teach some other people how to do the same. Does that make sense for everyone? So all of this, yes, question?
What's the format that you use for this teaching? Do you have workshops or seminars?
Yes, it is perfect that you asked that question. I'm going to lead to that right now. The format for everything that we do is circle, is bringing people together in circle. So that's what we're called, Circle Up. Now, why do you think we would have people in circle?
So they can see each other.
So they can see each other, they can face each other. Why else?
And they're all equal.
They're all equal. Why else? That's perfect. It's happening now, yeah. All of these things, perfect, yes. We all know it. Circle is as ancient as days. In fact, it is an indigenous process. All of this that I'm telling you about started in indigenous communities. And so people have been sitting in circle around the campfire. We sit in circle for dinner. We sit in circle just to shoot the breeze, right? And we look at each other, and everybody's equal and everybody has a voice. So we bring people together in circle in various kinds of scenarios. It could be in a workplace. It could be in the prison system. It could be in the schools. Any number of ways that we can use it. There's a whole spectrum and a whole variety. So circle is the main thing. We teach people how to be facilitators in circle and get those conversations and those dialogues going in a way that is meaningful for the people that are part of it. The focal point of this is what we call restorative circles. Restorative circles. And so what does it mean to restore? What does it mean to restore? To put back together, right? To heal, to grow. So a restorative circle, you may have somebody who did some harm. Now think about this. I'm just going to pick a scenario. A middle school youth. In fact, I'll give you a true life story. Two young brothers that attended this elementary school. They were African American. They were poor, but they were very well known in their community and within the school. The teachers loved them, wrapped love around these kids, just loved on them, and their kids were friends with these young people, and so it was a nice, tight community. Grandma was raising the boys and having a tough time of it, so these kids got lots of love from their community. Eventually they move away, and then they move back, and now they're in high school, and they happen to be walking by the elementary school where they used to go when they were kids, and they noticed the door was open in the summer, and so they let themselves in. And they thought they'd have a little fun. Went to a teacher's classroom and took a bat and hit a safe and tried to get some money out, and then went into the kitchen and opened a freezer and took some food out and left the freezer open. And so there was about, how much damage would you guess? About $1,500, just enough to make it a felony. So the teachers come back. Somebody takes a look at this video surveillance. These kids weren't smart enough to realize they were being videoed. And the teachers look at it and they go, oh my gosh, we know who these kids are. They knew as soon as they saw the video, and they're heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken. So they don't want these kids to be prosecuted. And there's a program in Gainesville that allows for this restorative kind of circles to happen. And so we were called in to do a restorative circle. And in the circle, you have the person who was harmed, the person who did the harm, as well as their support people. And anyone who has a vested interest in this process. So we had the two boys, we had their dad, we had about half dozen teachers, the principal, the school resource officer. And the circle revolves around 4 questions. Now you might want to write these down because you can use this in any area of your life, I assure you. The first question, now keep in mind this is a facilitated conversation, so there is someone who's trained as they're going through this, okay? First question is what happened? What happened? Seems simple enough, right? But we try to phrase it and have people speak it in a way that what happened as if a camera was in the middle of the room or a recorder was recording it. Like just the facts, okay? Just what happened, not the judgment, all that stuff around it, okay? So you get like a 360 view from your perspective and yours and everyone of what happened. The next question is what was the impact of what happened? And everyone gets to speak to that. So we start asking the kids, what do you think the impact was on your dad? And dad is sitting there. And it became very obvious the kids didn't have a good relationship with their father. But then dad got to speak to the impact and how humiliating it was for him to think that his boys, who he raised better, would do something like that. Then the teachers got to speak of the impact of this event on them. And at least half of them broke down in tears as they were speaking. Now I know that community wrapped their arms around these kids because of what the teachers shared in that dialogue. Each one said, I couldn't believe it when I saw that it was you. How could you do that to me? How could you have done that in my classroom? And as you can imagine, the kids' heads, they were sitting down, they were like this. And they had dreads. Their dreads are hanging down, they're not looking at anybody. And the conversation progresses. So the teachers start not just to berate these young men, but to say, you know, I made mistakes too when I was a kid. And the reason that we're here in after school hours is because we care about you. It's because we love you. It's because we want better for you, and we know that you can do better. And so as that conversation unfolds, the heads start looking up. And so what was the impact on the kids? They got to speak about that as well. So that's question number 2. What's question number 3 then? How do we make this right? Can we make this right? How do we fix this? And that becomes an opportunity for creativity in the group. Now this circle was happening at elementary school in Gainesville. I don't know Gainesville, I don't know the resources there. But who does? Everybody sitting in the circle, every one of them. And they started sharing. One of the boys said, well, I'm really good at math. So one teacher said, would you come and maybe teach my kids? Maybe you could tutor my kids. Another teacher said, I have a friend that works at the food pantry, and we fill backpacks every week, once a week, so kids can take it home. How about doing a food drive or standing in and filling up backpacks? What do you think about that? The kids were like, yeah, I'd love to do that. And then 2 other teachers volunteered, said, we'll go with you. We'll fill those backpacks with you. And then the 4th question is, how do we keep this from happening again? How do we prevent this from ever happening again? And then we write up a contract, and everyone signs off on that contract. Right, now, do you think those boys will ever do something like that again? Now think about how difficult it is. I don't know if any of you have ever hurt someone, or just me. Whether intentional or unintentional, how difficult is it to look someone in the eyes and say, I hurt you and I'm sorry, and I will take accountability for that. Now this process isn't for everyone, because one thing that's required is truth-telling. People who participate in this process have to be willing to speak the truth about what they did and to take accountability for it, and then be willing to make it right. So it doesn't work for everyone, but when it works, it's beautiful. It's amazing. And if you want to see this in its most extreme, there was a wonderful series, I think it was 10 parts or 8-part series that aired in May and June on CNN called The Redemption Project. And Van Jones was the host, and it shows how this process of bringing people together in circle is done in the criminal justice system. And these all involve people who had already or were serving their time. So there wasn't any benefit to participating in this process other than their own redemption, their own freedom, and their own healing and facilitating the healing for others. It really is life-changing. So we can use this in a kindergarten classroom. Imagine the kindergarten teacher getting their group of students, and let's circle up every morning and just say, what's going on in your world? Right? And talking about that and building those relationships that are going to allow these kids to know that they have a safe place, that there are people that care about them. So that's one aspect of circle that we do. Another type of circle we do is something we call dialogue. And we do dialogues between diverse groups. So the two main ones that I have participated in are police-youth dialogues and educator-student dialogues. So you get a dozen kids and a dozen cops or teachers, and you bring them together. Well, first they start separate. And in one room, the kids are going through a list of A through Z, and they're coming up with the stereotypes for the cops, right? So A is for, what do you think?
Aggressive.
Huh?
Aggressive.
Aggressive? Oh, you're so nice. I'm talking about kids here. So A is for well, okay. So A is for fill in the blank, B is for fill in the blank, C, etc. K is for killers, you know, and so on and so forth. And then this is what kids said about cops. This is what kids have said about cops sitting in their circle. Okay, I'll just tell you, A is for asshole. It comes up every time, every time. And the officers or the teachers are doing the same thing in another room. Now they'll be nicer. They'll say A is for attitude, B is for whatever. And sometimes they say the good things. It goes both ways. So they finish the list, we bring them back together in a group, and then we play this game we call As the Wind Blows. And in this game, you have someone standing in the middle. Remember musical chairs where somebody's missing a chair, doesn't get to sit? So the person standing in the middle doesn't have a seat. Everyone else is sitting in a seat. And the person shares something personal about themselves, and if it relates to anyone else, you have to get up out of your seat and run and find another one. Kids love it, adults love it. I've seen slippers fly off. I've learned way more about people than I ever want to know. But it's really interesting to see the questions. So the wind blows if you're an oldest child, and all the oldest children get up and run and find another seat. And then someone's left without a seat standing in the middle, and they have to share a fact, and so on and so on. So the room always changes when a cop says, okay, the wind blows if you've ever done something you could get arrested for, if you've been caught. And when all the cops get up out of their seats and run, the kids fall out. So now they're laughing, everybody's loosened up, having a good time, and we bust out the lists. So everybody's seeing that the kids think A is for assholes. Does anyone want to speak about that? And they will, and they do, and they do. And sometimes the cops will say, well, yeah, we can be. You know, and it's a wonderful, amazing opening as we facilitate this conversation and people start to see themselves in people that don't look like them. And you start to see that we have a similar heart, and we have a similar mind, and we have similar dreams, and it shifts everything. That's a police youth dialogue. We also teach, one more thing I want to tell you because it's so very important, is about trauma. We train people to understand the effects of trauma. Okay. How many of you have heard of something called ACEs, A-C-E-S? Adverse Childhood Experiences is what this is. This is an epidemic that, it's the largest public health epidemic we're going through right now in our country that no one knows about. And what this is, ACEs, is a scale from 1 to 10 of things that you may have been through as a child. So it's a point scale. So you get a point if you were physically abused as a child. It's a point if you were sexually abused. It's a point if you were physically neglected, if you ever worried about whether there was going to be food on the table, etc. It's a point if there was someone incarcerated in your family. It's a point if there was someone that had mental health issues. Anyway, the highest score you can get is 10. Now you have to imagine if you have a 10, that's pretty horrific. That has been a pretty horrific life. And when you look at the scale, you see that it correlates with every every problem there is really in our culture, from behavioral things like obesity and drug use and alcohol abuse and divorce and so many things, to the physical things. It affects all of those as well. And it's amazing. So if we could understand how to mitigate the effects of this trauma, we could turn things around. Now, some of you, I didn't go through all 10. I know when I have presented this before, people are sitting there, you know, making their mental check marks of what's my score. And it can be pretty mind-blowing when you realize it. But as what happened for me when I realized, oh, so that makes a lot of sense. That's how I ended up this way. It was also in some ways very freeing to say that it wasn't about something wrong with me. It wasn't necessarily that there was something inherently wrong with me. It was the things that happened. It was the things that happened. And that can be a very freeing thing. As well as helping people access the greater meaning for that. The greater meaning for that. So there's something we call the wounded healer. Are any of you familiar with that term, the wounded healer? The wounded healer is someone who finds their meaning and their purpose out of their pain. So it's the recovering alcoholic who becomes an AA mentor. It's the foster kid who becomes a social worker. It's the asthmatic who becomes a nurse. Those are the wounded healers. And so we do training for people who are frontline, working in the public, that have that tendency for burnout, to understand trauma and the nature of healing. And anything else? Would you say, anything else we want to talk about? I know we need to wrap up. All right. Well, in that case, I need to wrap up. Thank you for hanging with me through all of this. I apologize for the tech issue, but I got your attention. Okay.
Are you going to be here for a while after the forum? Maybe we can answer some more questions.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm sorry, we're just kind of on a tight
I
schedule.
gotcha. Thank you for your time and your